Well, hi, everybody. Welcome again to the Hanley Effect. I'm John Diven.
I'm Rachel Dosical.
How are we today, Dr. D?
Hey, Dr. D, how are you?
I am very, very well. You know, it's interesting being a parent of both adult kids and kids still at home, and being a human being in 26 and an American. It is impossible to get away from the influence of technology in our culture. And we've talked about it a lot, and I'm excited because we've got Kelsey Green with us today, she's a strategist, she's a speaker, she's a community builder, and she really has been investing a lot of her time and energy into understanding and addressing this relationship that we have with technology. And so we're so glad that Kelsey's here to talk to us about this today. Kelsey, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am really excited about this discussion today.
Me too, especially since we're using technology
to have
it. And it's interesting. There's so many different aspects, and I really want to hear from you. I'll tell you that I'm a family therapist, and there was a time where due to COVID and such, I had to do family sessions like virtually, and I thought this is going to be a failure, but I found it to actually be very effective. On the other hand, I might be spending a little too much time focused on my technology. So there's both sides of it. So, so glad that you're here to talk to us today. We always like to ask two questions at the start. We like to ask, tell us about you, who you are, and what you do. Tell us about your work. And then we're really interested in what your journey was that brought you to this today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. So you mentioned my name, Kelsey Green, and I do a couple of things. I have a strategic communications consulting practice. I work primarily with government entities and the public. So I do interagency liaising and also helping the public understand some very complex projects that are happening, that are technical and difficult to understand. So I do that. And I also run masterminds. I work primarily with women, but with everybody. And as you mentioned, I am really, really excited and focusing on digital minimalism as, an avenue to help people bring into existence these creative projects that they might have, or sort of just kind of reinvigorate their lives. As you mentioned, technology is such an incredible tool. And how do we strike that balance? So I know we'll get into that all in a second. You asked about my journey. I received my master's and my undergrad both in environmental conservation and management, and I worked in the nonprofit sector for quite a while. I was also on the field as a wildlife biologist for a bit. And, like many people that work in nonprofits, such a cool, can be such a cool space, and you can do such amazing work. And a lot of people experience complete and total burnout. And that is often coupled with also some financial insecurity. Unlike burnout in other industries, you're also often not getting paid a ton. So I definitely had that experience where I was, kind of hit one of those rock bottoms that I think are so helpful in our lives, and realized that I was just completely burnt out. And part of that was that I felt like I had to be answering emails and texts at all times. There was really no boundaries around, work and balance, work-life balance, because, this work was so important. And I believe that it was, but it came at the cost of, personal well-being. And so I launched a consulting practice, and that helped in some ways, for example, financially, but it didn't really answer that question of the burnout and the boundaries, because I just carried the non-existence of boundaries into my consulting practice. And then, when you're dealing with your own clients, Oh, you can just go down
Even
that
harder.
Yeah, you can, yeah. So over time, I've really developed these strategies and practices, and I'm obviously speaking about this a lot, and I think that brings us up to current day.
Love that. It's funny. I think wildlife biologist, right? I hear the birds chirping and the streams just flowing, and I think, man, that sounds great. But wildlife biologist, I'd never thought about this in 2020 something, has a phone and has email and has text. Uh, you know, no matter who you are, it is. We never seem to leave work. So how then do you set those boundaries? What are some of the things that you help people with?
Yes, well, first, I just want to do a little quick overview on the concept of digital minimalism, because this can be quite a scary term for people. As you've noted correctly, technology is here to stay. It's not going away. We need it for many of the things we're doing these days, right? I don't think maybe you can take a flight without a paper or with a paper boarding pass, but often things are on our phones. We have to have our phones, especially in other countries, I've heard. So it's not going away. Now, the idea of digital minimalism is that you are not just throwing out all of these tools, right? You're not saying, okay, smash the phone, throw the computer, like, I'm going to live out in the woods, and be a misanthropic Luddite, right? This is not what we're saying. And I just want to point out this great book, Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. He really coined this term, and it basically means the tools that are supporting your core values in your life. Use those with intention, use those purposefully, and optimize those, right? That's great. That's all wonderful. Everything else that might be just kind of gobbling up your time, damaging your mental health, certainly physical health, all this stuff, really perpetuating these cycles of digital addiction, let those things go. So I just want to point that out because it's a pretty critical distinction. I get this question all the time, like, oh, isn't it so ironic you're using Zoom or Riverside or platforms, or like you have a Google Calendar, like, isn't it so ironic? And I'm like, no, these are great tools that help me connect with people that live far away. I have a Whoop strap that's a fitness tracker, no screen, so it's not distracting me throughout the day, but the app is very cool. I do a lot of fitness stuff, so I love it. So it's not ironic because the point is, let's use the tools as tools and let go of the rest. So I just want to frame up the conversation within that perspective, that lens.
I love that. It's a great frame.
So let's start at the beginning. For our listeners, how would they identify what it is that is, say, gobbling up the time or distracting to them, in the use of technology that is not adding positively to their lives, which is what I hear you saying?
Yeah. Well, I just want to acknowledge, I think both of you are mental health professionals. Is that right?
John is. My background is business. Yes.
Okay. So you know a lot more about addiction in terms of coming from a clinical perspective than I do. So I just want to acknowledge that. But what I've seen in the research and what I've experienced myself and working with people personally is, honestly, one really easy metric is, how are you feeling? when you spend an evening zonked out in front of Netflix and scrolling at the same time, which is now the issue. The double screen is now becoming the issue, right? Or triple screen or whatever. How are you feeling after an evening of doing that? Versus, how do you feel when you go work on a project with your actual hands, woodworking, gardening, crafting with other people, even reading a book? I mean, I think that that's a really easy place to start. It's becoming, at least in my world, a really abundant conversation that we are feeling really out of control of our own use of our devices, very pulled to use them even though we don't want to. You know, I think this is starting to become really kind of a mainstream conversation. So to your question, how do we know? Well, I'll just say I run these screen-free Sunday challenges, which is 24 hours off of screens. And truthfully, when I first started these, I thought, how silly, like everyone can do this. You know, this is kind of a dumb challenge, it's not that challenging. It turns out people can't even do it for an hour or two. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole spectrum, but I realized people had put no boundaries around their use, and I think the average amount of times people check their phone in a given day is 250. So you go from that to zero, and it's pretty shocking. And so I think a great place to start is to say, okay, it's a Sunday. You know, I have this space in my day. I'm going to put my phone out of sight, literally out of sight. I'm going to, you know, just close all screens. I'm not going to be watching shows while I'm cooking or whatever, and just see what happens. See how you feel. You know, the first time people do this, including myself, I would kind of be like walking around like feeling like I was late for a meeting or something. Like kind of confused, like I should be doing something. I don't know what it is, until I realized, oh my gosh, I'm so used to just reaching for my phone, you know, and having these distractions around, that it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly.
It's so interesting, and when you talk about from an addictions perspective, right? You know, one of the things, if someone, you know, wants to, you know, how do I know if my drinking is a problem or if my use is a problem, that, you know, let's, you know, stop for a few months and see if you can stay stopped. And when you find that you can't stop for a few hours, you've got, absolutely, that would be indicative of a problem. And you're describing the clinical word I would use is compulsivity. Like this, you know, my car is important. It gets me, I got to use it every day, but I'm not like, I don't have a compulsive need to check on my car every 5 minutes. So it's almost, if I have that compulsivity. I know that for me, when I had a time when all right, I know you think I've never had any problems, but I actually I struggle. I'm a father. Grandfather, but I mean, it's when I had, 3 kids living at home and, you know, working a lot, I spent so much time on my phone that I started to realize it was a problem. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do something. I'm going to set a boundary. And the only boundary that I could set, the first one was, I will turn off my phone when I'm in the shower.
Oh my goodness.
That, but that idea of how does it feel? I felt so, and I'm a clinician, I'm a therapist, right? And I'm getting calls all the time, but if that idea of what does it feel like, man, it feels like I have to be on this all the time. It feels like it's in charge of me. And when I hear you describe that, I mean, it's compulsivity. It's this constantly, I've got to check.
Right. And I also wanted to point out that there's a lot of research happening around the way that it affects dopamine. And one of my favorite ways that I've heard of to describe this is basically you're going foraging for this dopamine that you didn't earn, right? And this means that every time you check your phone, whether something's there or not, and this is also, you know, a lot of the apps are modeled after slot machines where there's the reward is intermittent. It's not every time, and so it really encourages you to keep going and checking back. But the issue is that the more times you go and check your phone, you know, the more that your brain wants to, because it's getting these like tiny little hits of dopamine, and it makes it more difficult to go longer without checking your phone. Right? I think we could draw these analogs to lots of other kinds of addictions. I just saw an article by Cal Newport this week that was, film students can no longer sit through films, right? And I mean, I think we've all felt this, where our attention spans are just shrinking down, right? And until we start to push back a little bit, and I loved your example about just in the shower, until we start to push back a little bit, this is just going to perpetuate itself and make it such that it's really going to feel impossible for us to be off of our phones for any length of time. And I love your example because I feel like for some people that are practicing this already, 24 hours is maybe a great challenge and pushing them a little bit. For other people, that's just completely impossible. So starting with these little baby steps is great, I think. You know, if we know, of course, I don't think this is news to anyone, that the screens are pretty terrible for your sleep. Sleep is just so important for our brains and our bodies.
Right.
So the more that you can push back, even if it's literally just a minute a day or a couple minutes a day from being on your phone, especially in bed, oh, so bad. You know, trying to just push back and then really just kind of work on flexing that muscle of putting your phone, especially out of sight. This is pretty important because when there's a study out, it's called the brain drain, that shows that when your phone is next to you, someone else's phone is next to you, even if it's face down, people often do that, they think they're being polite. Okay, we'll put our phones face down. Your attention is just more fractured. So
right.
If you're trying to work, if you're trying to be fully present with other people, because the phone is there, it's just, your attention is just going to be more fractured. So you're either going to be dumber at whatever you're trying to do, or you're going to be less present. And I think this is just the skill of putting your phone out of sight. Even right now, I have, because I was just, you know, coming on to this interview, so I want to make sure I was present in case you guys called, whatever. So I have my phone here, but I literally put my book over top of it. And I don't have sound notifications on at any point unless I'm running an event or, you know, doing something critical. So there's no sound that will come on, but I also don't want to see it. I don't even want to see it next to me. So I put the book over top of it.
You know, those sound notifications are you know, another piece of this. A couple of years ago, I realized that the sound notifications, I was like a Pavlov's dog. That every single time an email would come through and there would be a sound like a Pavlov's dog, I would just run over and check my phone. And so I do the same thing that you do, which is at least with my emails and texts and the like, you know, those notifications are not on so that I'm able to be really present for whatever it is I'm doing, whether it's personal or professional.
Yeah, I love that example too. And I realize it's not practical or possible for everyone to not have any sound notifications on if you're caring for others, you know, aging parents, kids, and, you know, etc. So I get that not everyone has that privilege to be able to do that. But you asked about my personal journey, you know, when we started the interview, and one of the ways I came into this work was being in a relationship with someone who could not have the sound notifications on his phone. That was for social media, for text, you know, calls, email, all this stuff. So we're trying to have these deep conversations, and we lived far apart. So we didn't, you know, reside in the same household. So we see each other once a week. His phone is constantly dinging and blonging and blooping, you know, and even though it's not my phone, it's so distracting, and we couldn't get through a conversation. And, you know, I will say one of the downsides of doing this work is that, you know, when others aren't able to manage their use, it's really distracting and really annoying, because my space is calm. There's like, to your point about Pavlov's dog, there's no you know,
right.
These sound notifications that are making me go do something. So when it is a little challenging to be with others that have no boundaries around their use, and it became a big problem. And I've heard that this is becoming a problem for couples where one person's use is very different than the others, and I feel that.
It's another interesting parallel with the diagnostic criteria for addiction, right? So compulsivity is one of the other ones, but one of the criteria for a diagnosis of a substance use disorder, right, is continuing to being unable to change your use, even though it causes problems in your relationship. And it's so funny, I think that, I've heard lots and lots of stories, and I can even think of, times where my wife and I have had these conversations of like, we need time to put down the phone. But when you find that you can't make it, when you say, as a family therapist, I'll ask somebody, what's the most important thing in your life? Nobody says their phone. Everybody's going to say their family, and they're not lying.
Yeah.
And yet, when the phone is causing problems in relationships, that they'll still choose the phone, and that's kind of, it's diagnostic that there's a problem.
Right. Oh, this breaks my heart. It really does. It's just, it's a shame. So I think that there's a couple ways to go about looking at your use. One is a very pragmatic, practical way where you're looking at some hacks. I used to be I just want to give you a funny example. I used to be really against this kind of stuff. I thought it was so stupid. There's something called an RO box, which is a nice looking white box with like a wooden lid, and it just charges your phone, but it also tracks how much time your phone is in the box. And I believe this was designed for families because, to your great point, there'd be these families, parents struggling a lot to be present with their kids. They're on their phones, whatever. So there's this RO box idea. So you put your phone in the box, and it's kind of like a contest, I've heard, between parents who can have the most RO time, which means time that you're not on your phone, right? And you're presumably present with your family. And I used to think, there's a membership you pay for, the box is a couple $100. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so absurd. Like, just put your phone, I put my phone on top of the fridge, whatever. But now I've really changed my thinking around this, because it's sort of like, whatever you have to do it. You need to pay for a membership, have a box, to make it a contest, gamify it. Okay, whatever. Do it. Fight the tech with tech if you have to. That's fine. Okay. However, I think there's another pathway. This is also the argument that Cal Newport takes, and that is looking at this as an ethos, how you live your life, a philosophy, and looking at it in terms of core values. And for the long run, that's probably, in my opinion, the path that needs to be taken for this to really stick. And to draw some parallels, if you were looking at drinking, do you want to be the kind of person that's just like drunk every night, in terms of this value, or do you need to change that at this kind of ethos personal level? And you can probably speak to that better than I can, but in my opinion, this is the same with digital use, that you need to decide what kind of person do you want to be in relation to your phone, streaming, double screens on all the time, sounds, full presence, and go about change from that perspective.
I love that. I think that question of who do I want to be, that comes from an empowering place that recognizes that we have a lot more choice in that than we think sometimes. I think it's a beautiful question, and it's a difficult one, because a lot of times who I want to be is going to require something different from what I'm doing.
Yeah, I know.
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about the changes that my next levels. I've gotten pretty good at this. So I started with the shower, and when I did the shower, I realized that I was obsessing over my phone. And so as a clinician, I had at least enough insight to go, this is a problem, dude. And so I began to create other areas in my life. We don't have phones visible at the dinner table. There are other things that are. But I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, and I'm betting that people are listening and they're thinking about things right now that they might want to challenge themselves to do. I have, I think all of us probably are listening and thinking right now, what are things I might challenge myself to do to get a better handle on this? Also, I have to be the bad guy.
You do.
I am always the bad guy. I'm the one who kind of watches that clock over there and tells me when I'm, and watches also our producer and when it's time to begin to wrap up. But I'd like to ask two more things. So if the last thing, we always like our guest to have the last word.
Oh.
So I'm going to ask you in a minute, what is one last message that you would want from our audience to hear from you today? But before then, there is so much more to the work that you do. You are so relational. I would encourage people to learn more about what you do, about your work. How would people find you if they want to know more about you and the work that you're doing?
Absolutely, yes, thank you. Well, you can find me by my handle, KelseyLGreen.com. Same on Instagram, Kelsey L Green. And I write a lot. I believe in pushing ourselves to read long form content, and by long form I don't even mean that long, right? Just a blog post.
Right.
Yeah. So I write and I run these screen-free Sunday challenges, and I give people support leading up to the challenge because people need support to do this work, to be off their phones. And I'm also looking at creating a workshop series that is really the baby step approach, because we've talked a lot about this. This is becoming harder and harder to do as we have this technology integrated with our lives. So there's an approach, I think, that to your point about being relational, that we can come together. These conversations are very rich, I find, where people are saying, like, I want something different, I don't quite know how to do it. Similar to something like food, we need this, in certain aspects of today's society, unlike something like alcohol, which you can cut out.
Right.
And that's great.
Right.
It is
Right.
everywhere, but
Right.
you don't have to have it to survive.
Right.
But for this day and age, and especially if, you have these online businesses, then you do. So anyway, looking at how to strike that balance in these baby steps. So I'm really excited about this new workshop series that I'll be launching. So please, yes, KelseyLGreen.com.
Love that.
Wonderful.
And thinking about our audience, what is one last thing that you would want them to hear from you today?
Yes. The thing that I would really love to impart to your audience is that this work is important. This work is very important for your life, the way that you relate to others, even, strangers in the grocery store, for fulfillment, feeling like, your life has purpose and, being fulfilled. This is critical, important work, and it's uncomfortable work to do, to set these digital boundaries. But for looking forward to the future, these are only going to become more addictive, more prevalent in our society. People are only going to become more, focused in on their devices. And so this is sort of like the work that we will need to be doing as a species for the rest of our lives, and also helping to impart, this for the next generation. We haven't even touched on the topic of young people, but obviously this is, something that is of high concern for many people for good reason. So the message I would say is this work might be tough and uncomfortable, and it is critical.
As a mental health professional, I got to tell you, I couldn't agree more, and I hope that people will check you out and continue to look at this work. Thank you so much for what you're doing, because it is important.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Dr. D.
Thank you, Dr. D.
Fun as always.
This was wonderful.
And to everybody who is listening or tuning in and watching, want to say thank you, and we'll see you next time on The Hanley Effect.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for The Hanley Effect. To learn more about our programs, visit hanleyfoundation.org or call 844-502-4673.